Today we have ICs from 3 different suppliers, and we're going to test these to see if the parts are legit or not. Right now there's a big shortage of electrical components, and a lot of the components on the market are fake or old stock. And in addition, this particular part has actually gone into life. They changed it slightly, and now the parts that we use in our design are no longer being made. And so for a couple different reasons, these are particularly important to check to make sure they're legit. So today we're going to run through how to build a little test fixture to test the parts, and then how to actually check to see that they work and they're going to be easily soldered. So I have a test fixture that I made previously that we're going to use the same method to make another one for this other IC. This test stand I have here is for our audio codec, and in that case there really aren't any dev boards on the market that can be bought. Normally I would want to get a dev board and use that to make the little test stand, because it's just easier to deal with than the whole phone motherboard. But that wasn't available, so I just took the phone and I took the chip off. Once you've got it off, I'll take these tiny little, they're 1/10 of a millimeter magnet wires, and connect them to the IC pads. Once those are all connected, you run them over to, there's a socket that we get for each type of chip that you can put the chip into, and it'll have some spring contacts that make contact with the pads on the chip, and then you can basically test each chip one by one without having to solder it down, and that will test the function. You'll also probably want to have a look at it and make sure the pads aren't oxidized and things like that, so that you can actually get it soldered down to a board. Okay, so that's roughly how it works. The soldering is pretty tricky, but you actually don't really even need a microscope for something like this. As long as you have, my eyesight is not great, it's okay. And then I'll solder it, and then I'll take a little like a magnifying glass and just have a look at the joints once I'm done, and that seems to be enough. Okay, so I'll get this one out of the way since we're not using it today, and then we'll go through the process of building one start to finish. So the first thing we're going to do is put some headers in this little breakout board in the right locations, and it looks like this chip is 12 pins on each side, so we'll break the header off at 12 pins. And now what we're going to do, this is the dev board we got. This is the chip we need to test. So I'm going to take this one off and then solder wires to the pads here, and then from there I'll go over to here where we're gonna put our test socket. We're going to use some hot air to take this chip off. You could probably also just flood it with solder and get it off, but it's a little bit easier to use the hot air. I like to use this Kapton tape when I'm doing that. It tends to keep the other components from disappearing. Okay, plan B, hot air station doesn't work right now, so we're gonna flood it and get the chip off that way. Okay, so once the chip is off, you're gonna wanna look at the PCB and make sure the pads are nice and clean and there's not too much solder, like if there's a ground pad in the center, a lot of times they'll be totally covered in solder and you'll have to pull some of that off. And you also want to make sure that none of the pads are damaged, because if you start putting these tiny little wires onto a PCB, it's going to stress it. And if you start with one that's already damaged, it's just going to end up wasting a lot of effort. Okay, so we got the magnet wire here, and I'm just going to start. Well, maybe I'll start by moving this over. I'm going to put this on the breadboard now, and I like to hot glue it down. Run some hot glue along this. Now we just start soldering wires. I guess the most tricky part of working with magnet wire is really just getting the enamel off the ends of it. Okay, so now all the wires that we need are in place. So I'm gonna ring out. I'm gonna check the continuity of all the connections, and I'm also gonna make sure that nothing is shorted to ground. So we just run through. You also notice we got a little bit of an issue here with central pin on this chip holder is pulled out to this little ground point here, and the header is more than 12 pins long, but I've stuck this header on the breadboard right up against the edge, so I'm basically going to have to cut off a couple of these pins on the end here to get it to fit. And that'll work. I'm just going to have to bridge between ground and pin number 2, and then that should take care of it. Alright, so now we got everything soldered up to a state where it should work. We'll have to test it to be sure, but now we can load the first chip, see what happens. Alright, a couple chips from supplier number 1. Pull one out and stick it in there. While we're at it, I'm going to check and see if there's any oxidation. Well, this one doesn't look terrible, but it also doesn't look great. So put it in, and we're going to line up the little dot on the chip with the upper left corner of the Now, what we're going to do is, because this is a USB to UART adapter, we can test it by doing a little loop back. So I'm gonna connect to the RX and TX and bridge those. And then when I hook it up to a computer, if I send something out, I should see the same thing coming back. Okay, I'm going to move that over to a computer. So now we go into Minicom and set it up to act right. Alright, now if I type, it should double it up because it's sending out and coming back. Yep. Alright, so I also want to do some speed testing, but that's at least a decent idea that this is probably the right chip. All right, with chips going out of stock all over the world, it is pretty important to test and make sure what you're getting is actually what you paid for, because you're probably paying a lot more than you were before. So this is a fairly easy way of setting up a little tester to make sure that's true. I've definitely got to run through a few more tests before these are for sure what I asked for, but they do look like they are. So I'll get into that, and I hope you enjoyed watching the process.